child prodigy. She won a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music when she was just 13 years old. And then she moved to the Royal College of Music, so she had a really thorough classical training. And as part of her piano training, Nora met the famous cellist Pablo Casals, and she even had an opportunity to accompany him while he played on the cello. And the cello was clearly a really significant instrument in her life, although not the cellist herself. She fell in love with Gwen Farrer on the right, who was a cellist. And as you can see there, they were 4 or 5 years apart in age, 4 years apart in age. And Gwen died at the age of 47 during the Second World War, whereas Nora lived to the age of 90. And it's thanks to an elderly actor now called Derek Hunt. I have to be a little bit careful how I pronounce his name. Derek Hunt had the foresight to record Nora speaking in 1976, and he handed me these really brittle cassette tapes 4 years ago, which with trepidation I put into a cassette player and was amazed to hear these conversations in which Nora reminisced about her relationship with Gwen and their partnership, which was both off stage as well as on stage. So we're going to go through sort of chronologically, but it's just really some of the, we've only got 30 minutes. We're going to include some of the songs from their repertoire and a little bit of video footage, so it's quite a varied presentation. But it's just little bits really from a story that has fascinated me for 5 years since I discovered Gwen and Nora on a grainy bit of YouTube footage somebody had posted. So here we go. Perhaps I need to be standing a little bit nearer because I'm operating these slides. There we go. So there's Nora again, the full picture. And by the time she was just a teenager when she published these songs that she had composed. So her time at the Royal College and the Royal Academy of Music in London had not been wasted, and she, as well as studying piano, she also had composition as a second study. And we can see here that she published these 3 songs while she was still just about 19 years old. And there she is featuring on the cover of one Mabel's Pigtail. Here's Pablo Casals, who she had the opportunity to meet and play for. And I mention that because I'm going to read a little extract from the book now. And he's significant, slightly significant in that. So there she was, all set to be a concert pianist, when the First World War came along, and she turned her attentions to entertaining troops. Now, I knew, because my own dad was involved in entertaining troops in the Second World War, that went on, but I had no idea that there were concert parties in World War I as well. And they were arranged by a suffragist actress called Lena Ashwell, and she had a bit of a fight with the War Office, but eventually she was allowed to send performers out to France and Belgium, and later on other theatres of war, to entertain soldiers. And this is how Nora Blaney met Gwen Farrer in 1917. They're just setting off in a train. Here goes. They had a carriage to themselves on the 3-hour journey to Portsmouth. Gwen unlocked her cello from its case and eased it out. Nora was surprised to see she was going to play on the train, and even more startled when she lodged the cello's maple back and spruce belly firmly between her thighs. When Nora was studying, women cellists played to one side. Gwen explained that she had sold her horse riding trophies to buy this latest instrument, which she had found in a shop in Bond Street for 500 guineas. As soon as she started to play, Nora could see Gwen had a wonderful connection with her instrument. Her technique and artistry were superb. The train's movements and the sight and sound of this bold young cellist mixed with the powerful scent of her Turkish tobacco to produce in Nora, sitting on the velveteen banquette diagonally across from Gwen, the same visceral response she had experienced at Casal's feet. train on the tracks, the cello's baritone pitch, always reminding Nora comfortingly of her father's bassoon playing. She envied Gwen this beautiful, resonant, portable instrument, an intimate companion she could call into service anywhere. She privately marvelled at the risk she was taking to bring it with her to a war zone. Gwen switched without pause from the Bach to an English song, ages old but hugely popular. Drink to me only with thine eyes. Everyone knew the words. It was a Victorian parlour party standard, but only academics and those with queer sensibilities knew of its roots in erotic Athenian verse. Gwen had been looking down at her instrument with intense concentration up to now. Nora looked at her sleek black hair. She wondered if she should join in. The words were on her lips. Or leave a kiss within the cup, and I'll not ask for wine. Then came the phrase, but might I of Jove's nectar sup? And Gwen looked Nora directly in the eye. It was subtle but unmistakable. Gwen finished the phrase with a solemn flourish of her bow, and to break the tension of the moment she pulled a funny face, clicked her tongue and started to jazz the song up. She abandoned her bow to strum and pluck the strings and beat the cello's belly, syncopating the melancholy old tune in a wholly modern and exciting way that made it burst with joy. Nora later recalled, Gwen and I took an immediate liking to one another, and we chummed up from the moment we first met, adding she was the girl with the most delicious sense of humour I have ever known. Oh, heavens, Bob. Okay.
Writing in the New Statesman in 1920, Virginia Woolf had urged women wanting professional lives to make a dash for it and disregard a species of torture more exquisitely painful, I believe, than any man can imagine.
Gwen and Nora sang a topical song on the same theme. We don't want to get married. The lyrics went on, we're having too much fun. We don't want to be bothered with any certain one. Behind a husband, love may lurk, but we'd much rather look for work. In the house they shared at 217 Kings Road, Chelsea, they were secretly creating for themselves an admirable contemporary alternative to marriage, which could flourish alongside their growing careers. They had made a dash for it, and now the task was to sustain their lifestyle with the same energy they had used to create it.
Running wild, lost control, running wild, mighty bold, feeling gay, reckless too, every mind all the time, never blue, always going, don't know where, always showing, I don't care, don't want nobody, it's not worthwhile. All alone, running wild.
And then we don't want to get married.
We don't want to get married, we're having too much fun. We don't want to be bothered with any certain one.
Why let men get serious? I know how it would end.
It's true you'd find a husband, but you'd lose a darn good friend.
First, he's telling the world you're the light of his young life.
But we know well the light goes out when he says she's the wife.
Now, married men are nice, it's true.
But not the one you're married to.
We don't want to get married, we're having too much fun. Last night, we paid a call on a married couple that we know.
Been wed 5 years or more, but I've never seen them snappy. They seem happy
With their children playing around, it was a real love nest.
Now surely this must be bliss. yes, I really was impressed. But we don't want to get married, we're having too much fun. We don't want to be bothered with any certain one.
Some bad girlies go to jail if they get into strife.
But when you tie the knot, it's penal servitude for life.
I've got plenty of boyfriends, I love them all, it's true.
If you wed one, tell me what will the other 40 do?
Behind a husband's love may lurk.
I'd much sooner look for work. We don't want to get married, we're having too much fun.
In January 1918, prompting a case that acted as a barometer of public opinion about female homosexuality, a proto-fascist member of Parliament, Noel Pemberton Billing, had published under the heading
The Cult of the Clitoris,
an attack on an actress in his journal Valente. Here we have lots of connections with Mary Whitehouse, I feel. It led to a trial in which he claimed Maud Allan was
a diseased, mad girl,
and that her performance in Oscar Wilde's Salome was
calculated to do more harm to all who see it than the German army itself.
He was acquitted of libel, winning huge popular support, and was re-elected to Parliament. Maud Allan, on the other hand, was disgraced and ruined. The point was clearly made in the papers that lesbianism, or even the hint of it, was
a filthy, contagious, treasonous practice.
A few years ago I made this collage. You won't be able to see the finer print, but it basically represents Gwen and Nora and the love lyrics they were singing to each other, whereas on the very far right-hand side, appropriately enough, we have the hateful things that the men in the press and House of Lords and Commons were saying about homosexuality. By 1921, the men of the British establishment were becoming increasingly alarmed by what they saw as women's increasingly disturbing behaviour. On the 4th of August 1921, the House of Commons voted to amend the law to outlaw
acts of indecency between women.
The idea was swiftly rejected by the House of Lords, who feared that passing the bill would plant ideas in women's heads. The Earl of Malmesbury said,
"We all know that vice has been increasing, partly owing to the nervous conditions following on the war. But I believe that all these unfortunate specimens of humanity exterminate themselves by the usual process."
Other epithets such as unbalanced, neurotic and decadent were used to describe the perpetrators of an offence which none of the Lords could bring themselves to name, and few believed was practised by any but a small, albeit growing, minority. Lord Dessart argued that the amendment would lead to cases of blackmail, and said,
"Women would pay anything sooner than face being brought into a public court to meet a charge of that kind."
Though most of the speakers emphasised women's gullibility and innocence, none of those present could erase from their minds the case of Maud Allan 3 years earlier, and the implication that her alleged behaviour had endangered national security. There were rumours that suggested the taint of this noxious and horrible suspicion was on the increase. Cases like that of Violet Keppel, who is here, she was the daughter of Edward VII's mistress, Alice Keppel, and who Alice was working desperately hard to suppress rumours about Violet's passion for Vita Sackville West.
Radcliffe Hall was living openly with Lady Una Troubridge and had been publicly labelled a grossly immoral woman for allegedly wrecking Admiral Sir Ernest Troubridge's marriage.
Their friend Tupi Lowther, here top right, spent 1921 courting the lesbian painter, here we go, Romaine Brooks, who was a key member of Natalie Clifford Barney's Parisian circle.
An interconnecting network of wealthy British and American lesbians was growing. dining in smart restaurants, attending theatrical first nights, and holidaying in Capri, Florence, and fashionable resorts in France.
Oil heiress Jo Carstairs had just settled in London with a healthy disregard for convention and a passion for women and fast cars.
And the family behind the hugely successful Lions tea rooms and corner houses were despairing of a young relative they perceived as female who, dressed as a man, smoked a pipe, used the name Gluck, and was busy building up a portfolio of paintings in readiness to present a one-man show. They diagnosed a kink in the brain.
While men were getting hot under the collar in the Houses of Parliament all over the place, women were independently and discreetly settling down to life after the war, many of them in same-sex partnerships. There was a surplus, as it was unkindly called, of about 2 million women. No doubt some were profoundly unhappy and frustrated by the lack of a husband, but many flourished, both professionally and personally, outside the confines of conventional marriage, in committed and loving female relationships.
In August 1921, Gwen and Nora appeared at the Sheffield Hippodrome alongside the queer entertainer Fred Barnes. In 1907, he had written the song that made him a star, The Black Sheep of the Family.
Audiences were excited by his self-awareness in a performance that as good as declared his homosexuality. He acquired thousands of women fans who, with Fred as the object of their affections, could indulge in passionate but entirely safe romantic fantasies.
Gwen began adding to her repertoire a large number of self-deprecating songs along the lines of Barnes's lyrics.
So the chorus of Barnes's song was, "I'm the black sheep of the family, everybody runs me down. People shake their heads at me, say I'm a disgrace to society." So Gwen, who's pictured here doing a very eccentric expression, was very happy to take on the role of the I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for? She was eccentric of the pair, but the shortcoming of this was that she would grow to believe in the inadequate buffoon version of herself. The titles of some of the songs she performed were, Rosie is going to read out. Sorry, I've skipped a bit in the script just to confuse you.
So the sort of things she was singing were, I'm always just a little bit not right, or I can't get the one I want, somebody's wrong, I'm following you, sitting around, what about me? You flew away from the nest, and I may be wrong, but I think you're wonderful. So all putting herself in a sort of lower status situation.
Here's a clip from one of them. See in the book that this did have a detrimental effect on her self-esteem. I don't know if any of you have seen Hannah Gadsby's brilliant Netflix thing. What was it called, Rosie? But she sort of addresses this. Hannah Gadsby's an Australian comic who made a career. She's an out lesbian, but she used to make jokes against herself, and then in 2018 she decided, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And her, please somebody remind me what...
I think it's Nanette.
Nanette, thank you.
Yeah.
Nanette is a brilliant sort of... she presented it as her retirement piece. You know, she wasn't going to make jokes about herself anymore. Could she still be funny? And in Nanette, parts of it are brilliantly funny, but it's also fantastically moving and speaks to this theme really of how you can be without without putting yourself down. For a lot of the time, Gwen was seen as the dominant eccentric. At the moment, I haven't got a slide up, but I've got my t-shirt here. Gwen was seen as the dominant eccentric, and Nora as the more providing the feminine and submissive charm. But this binary interpretation disguised the truth. Nora was much more feisty, decisive, and in control than Gwen. The dynamics of the stage act also inclined those curious about their sexuality to assume that of the pair, Gwen was the lesbian, but Nora too was a dedicated lover of women, as we shall see in a moment. But I digress, because a moment or two about their careers. Here is the French producer André Charlot, who spotted Gwen and Nora and put them in a series of reviews in the West End in the early 1920s. And this is a clip of Nora speaking in 1976, talking about when Charlot was asked why he put Gwen and Nora in his reviews.
And then people said, why do you always have Nora bleeding Gwen Farrow in your shows? He said, well, listen, I have the best of both worlds. Nora fills the stalls with all the young men, all gazing at Nora. And he said, Gwen has all the lesbians in London to see her. He said, I've got the best of both worlds.
This is the clip I found on YouTube where I first discovered Gwen and Nora. Sorry, oh, that was intended for turning up, sorry.
Yes, the tailor cut them with a circular saw, the round on the end and high in the middle, and they take up half the strand. And though he never hardly ever had a dog stick in his hand, His pots up for the practice, his pots up for the time. His had his throat feel quite upset, the second then they treated with a pell-mell pen. People point at 30 when he's passing out of doors. And the food was hot and the picnic chest made a purchase, but his pots up for. All the fellas get so jealous when they hear the horse and Arabellas asking him to picnic in the woods. They know where to just a man to carry the goods. He doesn't have the food in a basket and they know by first sight. When he's picnicking where he puts the chicken and the sandwiches and pies. His pots up for the precious, his pots up for the pride. But his had his throat feel quite upset. The biggest in the teachers and the pell-mell set. He told me some point at 30 when he's passing out of doors. And the boozers pond and the picnic chest take a purchase, but his pots up for.
So here is Nora in her 80s with Derek Hunt, who I mentioned before, and this is on a trip to HMV. Nora had made so many recordings, many of them with Gwen, with the famous record company, that in 1975 Nora was invited back and Derek went as her guest, and they were really treated like VIPs and given, Derek's holding on to some recordings that they were given, some tapes of her and Gwen. Derek is important, as I mentioned, in the story, and when he was interviewing Nora, he compiled a list, before he began, he compiled a list of famous people that he knew of from the 1920s, but nearly all of them were men, frustratingly for me as a researcher. When he went down the list and asked her if she knew each one, Nora was wont to reply, "No, but I knew his sister." Those words, knowingly spoken, prefaced her stories about Ethel Barrymore, who gave her a fob watch as a token of her esteem, Adele Astaire, a great pal with whom she shared a dresser, Binnie Hale, whose ability with Cockney rhyming slang she envied, and other women she admired. Nora got on well with most of her male colleagues, but it was women who interested her most. It was not unusual for her to have conversations about women in which she appropriated the male gaze. After seeing the very beautiful star Dorothy Dixon, in the first night of a play. Nora and co-optimist star Melville Gideon, who apparently couldn't resist a pretty girl, shared their opinions. We got talking about who we thought was pretty and who wasn't, and we both agreed that Dorothy Dixon was quite one of the most lovely people we'd seen. She'd look smart in the bath. Nora's conversation abounds with similarly appreciative descriptions of women's forms. Edith Day was enchantingly pretty and young. Alice Delicia, the girl with the most lovely pair of legs in the world. Apart from disparaging remarks about men's nasties, their bad breath or general lifting skills, she never referred to the physicality of any man in hours of recorded conversations. So we're going to sing a song now that Gwen recorded in 1926. Excuse me, I'm trying multitasking here. Okay.
There's a missy that's got me dizzy and how, and she's the sweetest thing that you've ever seen. Oh, how you'll love her, I'm just aching to win that maid somehow. Oh, honey, can't you guess? Then I must confess, pretty little Mandy, I wanna be a little dandy. Say you're as sweet as lassies can be, and I'm always thinking about you, can't sleep without you, Mandy. Say you can bet I'm always handy, sitting around on your veranda, Mandy, dreaming of you, can't you see I'm lonely, nobody else could ever own me, nobody else has ever shown me what love can do, and all my troubles would go away if you could name the day. Oh, Mandy, I'm in love with no one else but you. Around and over Andy, Mandy, dreaming of you, can't you see I'm lonely, nobody else could ever own me, nobody else has ever shown me what love can do, and all my troubles will go away if you could name the day. Oh, Mandy, I'm in love with no one else but you. Thank you for bearing with us. So this next song was a favourite of both Nora and Gwen. Masculine women, feminine men. You might know this one. Gwen performed the song with Billy Mayle at the piano.
So Billy Mayle was a famous jazz pianist, and you really have to read the book, just like you have to go on Chris's tour. You have to read the book to know the ups and downs of their careers. But there were periods in their partnership when they pursued rival careers, separate careers, for about 4 years in the late 1920s before they got back together again. But during this period in the late 1920s, Gwen went into a double act with Billy Mayle. Now, and they did very well.
She and Billy were warming up on stage at the London Coliseum on January 1929 when the theatre's proprietor, Sir Oswald Stoll, said he thought the song was far too risque. He asked them to cut it from their act. Gwen said no, but to keep the peace, Billy agreed. That night, when they were on stage and it came to the point in their set when they normally sang the song, Billy played the intro to a different one. Gwen picked up her cello, slung it on her back, walked off the stage and out of the theatre.
And here it is.
Hey, hey, women are going mad today.
Hey, hey, fellas are just as bad, I'll say. Go anywhere, just stand and stare. You'll be amazed when you look at the clothes they wear.
Masculine women, feminine men, which is the rooster, which is the hen? It's hard to tell them apart today and say, Auntie is busy learning to shave.
Uncle just loves his permanent wave.
It's hard to tell them apart today. Hey, hey. Girls were girls and boys were boys when I was a tot.
Now it's hard to tell who's who or even what's what.
Knickers and trousers, baggy and wide.
Nobody knows what's walking inside.
Those masculine women and feminine men.
Stop, look, listen, and you'll agree with me.
Things are not what they used to be.
You say hello to Uncle Joe.
Then look again and you'll find it's your Auntie Flo. Masculine women, feminine men, which is the rooster, which is the hen? It's hard to tell them apart today and say, Auntie is smoking, rolling her own.
Uncle is always buying cologne.
It's hard to tell them apart today. Hey, hey. You go in to give your girl a kiss in the hall,
But instead you find you're kissing her brother Paul.
go to a party, most any place.
Horsing soprano.
Mother sings bass. Those masculine women and feminine men.
By 1934, Nora had settled down with a husband, an eminent surgeon, Basil Hughes. He was based up north in Bradford. Gwen was heartbroken when Nora retired from the stage and moved to Yorkshire to live with him. It was the end of their live performances together, but not the end of the partnership.
Gwen had rented a cottage in Essex.
Oh yes, yeah, I was going to say that, sorry. So Gwen was still living in the house that she and Nora had shared together at 217 Kings Road, Chelsea, but she rented a country cottage not far from London in Surrey, and it was here that they spent time practicing, rehearsing together to make a recording.
Nora seems to have spent so much time with Gwen, bearing in mind she'd just married Basil, in the winter of 1934 and 35, that local shopkeeper Lena Bridger was under the impression they were cohabiting. Speaking in 1971, she recalled,
Two actresses, Gwen Farrow and Nora Blaney, lived at the paddock. They were characters. They used to dress up and walk up the village and all sorts of peculiar things, for those days anyway.
With her husband Basil deeply involved in his medical work in Bradford, evidently there was no barrier to Nora and Gwen spending many days and nights together as companions, colleagues and lovers, perfecting the material they would take into the recording studio. It seems Nora was making all the compromises she could to her marriage in order to be with Gwen, to work with her and to win her lasting forgiveness.
They celebrated Valentine's Day in their old Chelsea home, having motored up from Effingham. The next morning they drove to the converted Georgian townhouse 5 miles away that housed HMV's Abbey Road studios, opened by Sir Edward Elgar 4 years earlier. This was where Nora's hero Pablo Casals would record his Bach cello suites. The work Gwen and Nora had put in over the preceding weeks paid off, and the result was the finest recording they ever made.
For their final song, they carefully crafted their own take on a song which Bing Crosby and Leslie Hutchinson had just recorded with words by African-American lyricist Joe Trent. Maybe I'm Wrong Again. Gwen and Nora were the only artists to record it as a duet.
adding their own harmonies to the deceptively simple lyrics about forbidden love rekindled. It matched their personal circumstances to perfection, with its almost casual acknowledgement of transgression. Maybe I'm wrong again, and its exultant conclusion, let me be wrong again. So we're going to finish by singing it for you now.
I looked at you, decided to try love once more. A little afraid, for love always fooled me before. I'm dreaming dreams, those beautiful dreams that everyone dreams about love. So I'll take a gamble and see what fate has in store. Maybe I'm wrong again, playing with love again. Maybe I'm wrong again, believing in you. Let me be wrong again, for I love the thrill that comes when you love again, when two hearts are still yearning. Maybe this new romance is just a song and dance. I'll take another chance, and my luck may change. I might find paradise, sometimes people do, but maybe I'm wrong again, believing in you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. We can't let you go without mentioning the book. The book, okay? Here is the book. It's great. I mean, there's loads in it that we haven't told you, and it's a really good read, and it's a fantastic story. And it's on for sale here now for £10. And Ali can sign them if you